I'd like to introduce Luca. I call him Cookie Monster. Probably hates that. I don't know why anymore.
You had to say that in here, right?
He's like a furry, fuzzy, lovable guy. And we always make a joke when we have team meetings in our office that he's the garbage collector because nobody outside of R&D understands what that means. But he is a garbage collection expert, and that's what he's done a lot of at Sociomantic. But today he's going to talk to you about something much more exciting than that, at least in my eyes. So the stage is yours.
Thank you. Okay, so you know my name already. I am the technical development lead in Sociomantic Labs. And the talk is called Sociomantic and D, and you, because for the German speaker that means you. So I'm going to talk in this talk mostly about the history of D and Sociomantic related to D. Also a little bit about my history related to Sociomantic and D, because I'm giving the talk. And at the end, at least we'll approach to the present time. And after that, I will talk a little bit about the future. Also, the first slides might be a little bit boring. I will be mostly reading the slides because they are just dates and facts. And I'm always sucked at history, so I don't remember them. Okay, yesterday I got this first slide presented, like in the panel, they made the exact same slide with the changelog of the 0.0, which wasn't even 0.1. I was surprised when I went to the changelog and saw that. And something that wasn't said yesterday is that we are approaching the 15th birthday of D. So, after the Big Bang, we have some milestones, or at least versions that I consider that introduced some important stuff in the language. So in January 2002, we have the package implemented. So yes, there was a D without packages. In April, we have the first source code published, like the compiler, the front end was released as part of the zip, because DMD was released as a zip package. September, we have templates for the first time, which kind of changed the history of D, because I think it's one of the killer features from D. And in May, we have the first Linux version. I think at first it was only Windows. Then came the dinosaurs. So in September 2003, we have the for each statement also. Can you imagine now a D without for each? I guess not. In May, we have mixins added. And this is where sometime between 2004 and 2005, I started to follow the language. I can't remember exactly when, to be honest. And I was too lazy to go through the forums to try to look for my first messages there. I did it for Andrei Alexandrescu, but afterwards I asked him when he started, and it was a different date, so it was in vain. So in May, we have the static if, I guess, another killer feature from D, and something called if type that I never heard before. I don't know if, did anyone heard about this if type before? Wow, we have one. Sorry, wait for the mic, please.
It's not if type, it's ifty. IFTI, implicit function template instantiation.
No.
Oh, sorry. Never mind.
So it's a relic. It was removed a couple of versions afterwards. I don't know what it's about. Maybe, I don't know, Walter knows, or not even him. Anyway, just an anecdote.
We had it here.
So after some time, we get also some weird stuff, like scope was called on scope, whatever. This was changed in version 0.149. And by this time, the Sociomantic founders, actually Sociomantic founders to be, because Sociomantic didn't exist by then, they started a PhD project, PhD. It was in PHP, I think. And that horror was what led them to D. So you should thank PHP, I guess, or I. In May, we have the first commits to Tango. In that time, it was in stealth mode. Actually, there were, I think, a couple of other projects that joined together. I don't know, who here has heard about Tango? Okay, We have old people here. And how many of you have used Tango, actually? Okay, I would say half of it, half of the crowd. Okay, so Tango got started by May 2006. And I'm putting in the slide some random parts of the changelog from the D version at that time, just for you to get an idea of how the language was progressing. By July, we have the static renaming and selective imports implemented. It took only 10 years to complete, but finally, it's here. So by December, we have Android's back. And this was the last 0-point-something release of DMD. So we have a very short story of D1. By January 2007, D1 was released. As they also said yesterday in the panel, there was nothing very interesting about it. It was just an arbitrary tag, just saying, OK, people are using the language. Let's call it 1.0. And just a few days after that, Tango was finally announced publicly. It wasn't released yet, but announced. By February, we got compile time execution of functions, CTFE, another great feature that also is causing some headaches for some time. I hope someday there will be a talk where we say, OK, CTFE, it's not using all your memory. By April, we have the first Tango release. It was a release candidate. Also, there were added the ref and macro keywords to the language. Macro, I don't know if anybody remembers macro. OK, just a few of you, lucky guys. So it was something related to try to allow manipulating the AST for metaprogramming. It never took off. It was delayed until D3, so you have to wait a little bit, I guess. But it's still a reserved world, right? Does anybody know? Walter knows.
About the macro keyword?
Yeah.
Okay, the macro keyword was added so that people would not name their code using the macro identifier. So it was kind of reserving it for the future if we'd ever need it, and if we wouldn't have to pick some strange name because too many people were already using macro as an identifier. That's all.
Okay, by June 2007, we finally get a fork of D. So D2 get born. Basically, what was added was the const system, the const invariant and final. Well, final was already a keyword, but the use of final. And this was kind of a major controversial change. That's why it was forked also in D2, because a lot of people wasn't convinced about this const system. So basically, we got a D1 version, which was feature freeze. So only bug fixes and not making changes were getting in. There were, I think, a couple of minor breaking changes for fixing some bugs, but it was mostly quite stable. And this was kind of a controversial time for D. So between mid-2007 and late 2008, this is when the Tango versus Phobo battles began, and there was this really split of the community, because a lot of people really hated the const system. And just to give you an idea of how many people didn't like the const system so much that there was even a D1 derived language. It was called Amber. Does anyone here ever heard about Amber? Oh, whoa, I'm surprised. I think it never see the light, right? Or I guess not. Anyway, it was mostly developed by the Tango and LDC developers by then, which are not the same developers of LDC right now. And it was like a complete language. It was a huge effort. They had a new front end written completely from the scratch in D1. And they were using Tango as the standard library, and they had a backend writing for C code and for LLVM. So what I mean is a lot of effort had been put in something that was not D2 at the time. Here is where my history and a little bit of the Sociomantic history just coincided by chance. We both at this time started to work on a serious project, and we needed to make a choice. So basically, in August 2008, Sociomantic founders start asking questions in the Tango forums. I guess they were thinking about using D for the new company. And I started working on my thesis, the concurrent D garbage collector. If you don't know what that is, I gave a talk in DConf 2013, so you can watch that talk. So these were the options, basically. You had D2 and Phobos, which basically had no version control. By the time the sources weren't even buildable, you just got a zip with a lot of source files that you couldn't even build. So if you were brave enough to make changes, you couldn't even test them. It was still mostly a one-man show, so it was Walter against the world. I think there were a couple of contributors like Don, that I think they had some privilege, access to the code or test suite or something. I think Andre also was probably writing code for Phobos that was starting to get a little bit more attention. But it was really, really hard to contribute, really hard. And also it was focused on new features and experimentation. The language was changing all the time and really deep breaking changes. On the other hand, we had D1 and Tango. Tango had version control in the source. It was SVN, but at least it was something. It was community-driven. There were a lot of contributors, active contributors, and it was easy to contribute. Instead to fight to be able to contribute, people would ask you, please contribute. So it was really easy. And it was focused on stability and usability. I think mostly the guys that were behind Tango were also people trying to do serious work with D. And this is more or less where the Sociomantic era begins. So in February 2009, we have the first issue opened by the Sociomantic founders in the Tango project, I mean. And in April, Sociomantic is officially founded. By May, the founders start sending patches to Tango, so there was also like a willingness to contribute to the community. And by then, this is also just an anecdote, is the time where D2 started to get the TLS global storage by default. So again, a lot of breaking changes all the time. And in August, Sociomantic got the first employee, which was a D developer. Actually, it wasn't a D developer, but he had to become one. It's David, which probably is not here yet because he lives in a different time zone, although he lives in Berlin. So finally, roads start to open. So in September 2008, we have the first version of D2 using D runtime. D runtime was basically the Tango runtime ported to D2 by Sean Kelly, which was the main developer of the Tango runtime. So this was, I think, a huge step from the D core team towards trying to unify the community. I think it was a kind of a sacrifice. Okay, they say, okay, we will drop our runtime, we'll use Tango runtime, because before, if you were using Tango, you couldn't use Phobos because they had a different runtime. So I think it was a good gesture. By March, we had the first zip file with buildable DMD source, so good. Now if you made a change, you can actually test it. In October, we have Phobos turn to use the Boost license, so I think this was a major commitment to open source, which was also really hard at first. Even when some source was released, I don't think the project was really open source. I think this probably when this line was crossed, like being really an open source project. And also a major step was putting the code into some version control. At the time was SVN in this source, which, again, SVN is not the ideal, but at least was like the de facto repository for D code. Okay, this is the time where CDGC has his 15 minutes, which was a couple of months, but let's say, I don't know, 15 weeks maybe. In September, I finished this garbage collector. In October, I submitted the patch to Tango. Again, it wasn't even me wanted to send, well, I wanted to, but the Tango developers asked me, can you please submit patches? We are interested in this. So it was a very different attitude. By November, Sean Kelly, the maintainer back then of the runtime, even port the GC to D2. There is an experimental branch. I think it compiled, but it never really ran. It was just there, but nobody really paid attention to it. And in January, we have finally the DMD project moving to GitHub. This is not related to the CDGC, but I think it's also a major. I think this is when the project say, okay, we are definitely open source. And there is Eckhart, David. Sorry. So in January, finally, CDGC gets merged into Tango. It's not the default garbage collector, but it's there for people to try it out. And this is also where my history crosses with Sociomantic. In April 2011, the Sociomantic people, or at least one person, start to play with CDGC. So I get this, after some conversation, I get this message in IRC, in the DTango channel. Some guy called Soprano tells me, Luca, I am using your CDGC right now. Does anybody know who Soprano is? Yes, we have one. Two. Wow. You really know him by this nickname? Okay. Soprano, now it's called Marens, and it's Matthias Baumann. He was the third Sociomantic employee. I think he's not here, or is he?
He also lives in a different time zone like
Yeah.
David.
Okay. We have to move the conference to this time zone, you know? Okay, so in May, I got my first formal contact with Sociomantic, and by October, I was in Berlin, basically, working. I was the fourth D developer there, and more or less the 15th employee overall, just to give you a feel of how small the company was back then. And when I came to Sociomantic, I saw this was happening, basically. In December 1st, unrelated thing, D1 is announced to be discontinued in 1 year. But we really need to migrate. We were using the 32-bit compiler. We really need to migrate to 64-bit because we had we still have a distributed hash table, and our hashes were 32 bits. And we needed more than that because we had more data than that, so we need to move to 64 bits. So by the time we said, okay, we first moved to 64-bit, should be easy, it's nothing. And then we moved to D2 because we have a whole year ahead, so plenty of time. Just to put you in context, the first 64-bit commit in DMD was just only 1.5 years ago, like before we started porting. Back then, the commit messages were 64-bit work, basically. And the first supposedly working compiler was released 8 months ago. David?
Yes. Just a little note. The reason was not that we had more data than with more than 4 billion records. But we got hash collisions. We got lots of hash collisions due to the birthday paradox. That was the motivation.
Yeah, true. Thanks. Okay, so I think we were probably the first serious user of the 64-bit compiler. I think it was done 8 months ago, but nobody really used it for real, for something serious. And also at that time, some guy that you might know, he's here. I don't know if you recognize this guy. But this guy called Don joined Sociomantic also. He was the 5th D developer there. Okay, the horror. So in February, we continued doing this work and finding out it wasn't that trivial. So This is some research I've done going through all emails. We started to use this term called DBOTD, which is debug of the day. And also find a couple of these lists that don't make with 64-bit bugs under progress, with pretty things like, this is a real example, pretty things like memory corruption, floating point that it's behaving weirdly, we have wrong code, horrific optimizer bugs, stuff like that. So, but we finally finished. In June 2012, it's completed. It was more than 6 months of work, and remember, there were no language changes, just adding one flag to the compiler, and that took us more than 6 months. Even when there are no language changes, it's a special case because most 64-bit bugs were bad code generation and corruption, so they were really, really hard to debug and to track. So we went through a lot of pain. We didn't contribute that much to the community, but I think this was a huge contribution. We suffer for you, so I hope you appreciate it. Is anyone... Is anyone now using a 32-bit compiler? Okay, there are a couple of flaggy guys, but I think we at least helped some people to have a stable 64-bit compiler. Okay, so finally the end comes. In December 2012, we have the last release of D1. It's 176. So it's dead, maybe for you, but not for us. In February already, we had an internal release, D1076+++, and this was the short version number. So it was extremely informal. This is the email I wrote to announce it in the company. So basically saying there was some bug and somebody needed it fixed, so don't compile the version, and I upload it to my machine into this file, so download it. And of course, this bug was a 64-bit bug because we already have our systems in 64-bit, but we were still hit by some bugs. Okay. I didn't have a better title for this, so I'm sorry. So stuff that happened in 2013. It was the first global D conference. Sociomantic sent 2 speakers. One was me, talking about the garbage collector, as I said before. There was Don, and I don't remember, this phrase is from there? No, it's the following. Yeah. Okay, so after that, I guess we got inspired, so we started talking seriously about moving to D2. So it was the first real analysis. By June, we got another guy that you might know called Michaels, but people know him as Dicebot. I guess he doesn't need much introduction, but you can see the hand there. He was the 10th D developer. So in December, we have the first kind of more serious internal D1 release. This is the short version number, if you want to read it. So basically, it was at least like a Debian package. It was not something like back then. Just people have, every developer have a different DMD version. They just download it manually, install it. So this is when we started to get a little bit more serious about internal releases. So D1's not dead, at least not for us. So from that time to the present, we made already 17 internal releases of DMD1. It is an average of 1 every 1.5 months, more or less. Lately, it was less frequent, more or less every 3 months. And in May, we have the new DConf 2014. Again, we have 2 Sociomantic speakers. And we managed, again, to talk about D1 in a D2 conference, which is amazing. Okay, D1 is not dead, but at least we are planning the assassination. In March, we have the first serious plan to migrate to D2. There were 2 things that were very clear for us. I won't get into much detail because one of the talks Michael gave into last DConf, it was about the migration process. But basically, we couldn't afford either stop development, like real business development, or fork the code base. It was really hard to sell the move to D2 because we have a language that works, basically, and we don't really need D2. So the only way we could move to D2 was by not disturbing the business at all. Like the only reason we had to move is, okay, maybe reducing the maintenance cost of having our own releases, and then just to be closer to the community, to be able to finally contribute something and maybe use stuff that the community do. So it was clear for us that the code must work in both D1 and D2 as a transitional step. We couldn't make just a blind jump. So in June, we start working on the serious plan. We have an official plan approved, and I'm sorry, Dicewat, I sacrificed him to take care of the migration, basically. We started adding stuff into the D1 compiler to make our life easier, like we had a B2 switch, which will warn you about things that won't work in D2. Because if you try to run a D2 compiler into D1 code, you get really bad error messages because, of course, the compiler is expecting D2 code, not D1. So the errors it will give you, they are very misleading in some cases. So by October, Michael ported the garbage collector as an experiment to D2. This was just an experiment. We never really expected to be merged because it was just a raw port of our current D1 code to D2 again. So the current garbage collector has a lot of improvements, and it makes no sense really to discard all this improvement. At some point, we will have to do it on top of the current garbage collector if we need the concurrency. We kept adding stuff to this V2 flag for the D1 compiler. We created a D1 to D2 fix tool to complete, because we can get really, really close to have D1 code that is compilable in D2, but not there. So for the last very small steps, we had to create a tool to automatically convert the code. And we start the Tango migration. We have an internal Tango. Some people might wonder why we didn't use the current port of Tango to D2, and we didn't because we need a Tango that works both on D1 and D2. And also because we also made some changes to our internal Tango. At some point, at first we tried to always contribute back every change to Tango. At some point, we realized we were the only people using Tango, so it was kind of pointless to get all this bureaucracy to make changes to Tango. So in March 2015, we start migrating our biggest or the most important library to D2. This is called Ocean, and it was basically an extension of Tango. There was some code that we wanted to add. So there are very basic facilities that were missing in Tango or stuff that we extended from Tango. By that time, also Ian Bucklow on Sociomantic. Some people might know him too, but guess what? He's not working as a D developer, so shame on you, Ian. But that time also the DIP, this is the D improvement proposal, number 75 is created about the release process, which thumbs up. We really need more of that. And because of that, I think we had the first DMD point release in April. That was D266.1. And we also kept releasing internal D1 versions. By May 2015, we have Tango migrated finally. So this is the tip of the iceberg. It's the first base library, but we have something. In DConf 2015, again, we have two speakers, and as I said before, Michael talked about this migration process, so if you want to have a look at the talk, if you're interested in that topic. And we continue with this migration process. In July 2015, we have the first DMT2 bug fix release internal. Like we still find bugs in the compiler, and we still can't wait for these bugs to be released. And also when they are released, a lot of the time they are released in a new version that introduces more changes, so we can really use it. So since then, we have been we've done 5 internal releases of DMD2, so this is on top of the other 17 from D1. In September, the Ocean migration is complete. By November, this is kind of unrelated of D2, but it's related in a way. DMD was ported to D, which is really awesome and great, but for us it's a headache because now any bug fix in D2 that we need to backport to D1, we have to do it ourselves basically because we can't just apply the patches anymore. But I guess this puts good pressure on us to move faster. So finally, there is some life on Mars. In January, we have 2 applications fully ported to D2. This is 2016, so this year. We start talking with the D Foundation. We want to get closer so we can collaborate to both see how we can help and how we can make sure that the language is good enough for our needs. It was really good to see the talk yesterday about Weka, that they have very similar requirements. So I think we are not alone out there. There is a real need for some of the features, like being more careful about memory allocation and stuff like that. And also, by that time, Matthias Lang, that you might know also maybe, Geode, he contributed to ByteD, I guess, or something else, I don't know. Some stuff. But he gets approval to contribute to the D2 compiler through a program that we call Tsunami, that I will talk just a little bit more about it at the end, but then Dland will give you a little bit more information about it. But basically, in this context, it means something similar to the Google 20% time, so he will be paid to work on the D2 compiler, basically. You almost sound excited. So February, we moved to D270. This is something I guess, maybe I cut accidentally. But we stay at D266 just for stability reasons, as I said. Even when maybe there are no major breaking changes by now, there are still some breaking changes from version to version usually. And we couldn't just play catch up with the decompiler while we were doing the migration, so we just took with that version, at least for a while. After some time, we said, okay, let's move to 270 because we are falling again too behind. Also, we start working on a buffer replacement for D1 stomping arrays. This is quite a big problem for us. Like the const system is not that much of a deal, but the stomping is causing headaches for people that don't know. In D2, there was introduced a runtime feature to allocate new memory when there was any possibility that you could overwrite some memory in an array by changing the length. And we use that feature in D1 a lot. We do all our buffer manipulation using this, like just plain arrays. And for us, this means we are having a lot of hidden allocations everywhere. So we're working on a solution for that. But this time, something that we call internally Tang Ocean happened. In March, okay, there is a new D version, but basically what we do is merge the Tango user library into Ocean, our all internal library. This is because we also saw that, some noise in here. We wanted to make the migration easier. Right now you have in D2 a D runtime and the user library is separate. We had Tango that was covering both. And one thing about the runtime is we don't need to do anything about the runtime. It can be just D1 only because it will work only on D1. In D2 we will use D runtime. So we wanted a unified base user library, so we merged both both were D2, so it wasn't a big deal. So finally, we have some live. This April, like last month, some days ago, we have 2 applications fully ported in 2 more applications fully ported to D2, 4 in total, but we have 2 applications that we compile in D2 and are running instances live. So they're still kind of experimental because we found some performance regressions with some of them. The good news is one performed better and consumed less memory, so this shows us that it's not an inherent problem in D2, but probably this stuff that I mentioned with stomping arrays, probably with hidden allocations, with delegates also. So what we saw is some big memory usage increment in some applications and some other that were quite slower than in D1. But we have two applications that are running in D2 now. Speaking of the now, we're at DConf 2016, in case somebody didn't notice. This is the first conference co-organized by Sociomantic, and as Dland said, we hope maybe to continue working alongside D to make good conferences. It was the first also in Europe, which I think is good. I think there is a lot of people using D in Europe, and sometimes it's not that easy to go to the States, so it's good to have some here, some there. This time we have 2 speakers again, but this time it's a weird combination because we have one more speaker, Gautam, gave a lightning talk. Then in the panel we will have 6 more speakers to put in a way, and then we have Dland, that was another speaker because he spoke a lot. So, quick summary on the D2 migration right now. It's been already 3 years since we started thinking about the migration. It's been 2 years since we have a migration plan, since we have our first plan saying, okay, we're going to do this. It was a little bit more than a year that we started serious migration work, and I want to highlight that until now it was mostly Michael's, and then Matthias Lang started to help a little bit, but it was like 1 person full-time-ish and 1 person part-time. So once we are confident that our applications will not have performance regressions in D2, I think we can involve much more people to work on D2. And we already have about 30 D developers, and we're still growing. And we reach the future. So we have still a long road, a lot of stuff to do. So we have 4 from 5 core libraries ported. That's pretty well. But we have 6 utility libraries, and only half of them have been ported so far. We have only 4 applications from more than 30 that we have in D. This is between 10 and 15%. And also kind of the bad news is they are the simplest applications we have. As I said before, the good news is only 1.5 person were working on this. And the thing is also, we are only talking about the transition phase. What we have after we said, okay, we have D2 programs is just D1 code that compiles in D2, so to speak. So we are not using Phobos, we are not using any specific D2 language features. So after we have everything in D2 and we can drop D1, there will be a lot of work on trying to use more idiomatic D2 code. So what we will have to address these performance regressions, so there is some work to be done in there. We might need to port the GC2, like when we start trying to migrate, we have some real-time processes that have very low latency requirements. For those, we have to see how the current garbage collector performs, and in case it's not good enough, we will have to do something about it, probably making it concurrent or something. And we want to have more hopefully D2 developers, so we hope you join Sociomantic. We're hiring, so careers. And we want to do a pull request to the community. We want to merge back. We want to be part of the community. We want to contribute back. We want to be able to use stuff that you are doing because there are a lot of great stuff going on. And we will start by open sourcing Ocean, this base library that we have. This is also part of the Tsunami program. We hope to do it by June. That's the schedule. You know how schedules work, so please have some patience in case we don't make it. Since now Ocean includes some stuff from Tango, this is some information that I want to give. I won't talk in detail about this, but just about licensing, because I guess it will be a common question. So we want our code to be Phobos boost, so it's Phobos friendly, so anyone can take code and use it in Phobos, for example. But since we have code that came from Tango, and it's really hard to contact all the Tango contributors to ask for a license change, this code will have to stay BSD. So we are going to license our code with dual license, BSD and Boost. So if you want to use any bits that we wrote, you can use Boost, but if you want to use the library as a whole, you can, and you don't care about using BSD license, you can just use BSD and use everything. We expect more collaboration with the D community and Foundation. We're having monthly meetings with Martin Novak, so we try to talk about the problems we have and how we can fix it in a way that it's also good to the community. We want more people to contribute to the community through the Tsunami program, so maybe some other people in Sociomantic would apply to this Tsunami program to contribute to maybe the compiler or other D projects. And we want to do more open sourcing. Indirectly, to be able to release Ocean, we will have to release other projects because it's using like a build system that we will have to release. It's using the D1 to 2 fix tool that we will have to release because, again, this Ocean code is still D1 that it's converted to D2 with this small tool. So you will be able to play around with it and use it in D2, but still it will look like D1 code. And this is all I have, folks. So questions? Mike?
Regarding your performance issues, did you consider using LDC? Because for us, there is a huge difference.
We consider it, but we don't think it's gonna make a difference because it's mostly allocation problems. Like I think it's the hidden allocation. We have to get into that, but for now we're sticking to DMD because it's what we use in D1. In D1, there is only DMD. There are no other compilers that are maintained or up to date. So we want to play around with LDC and GDC when we move to D2 or maybe when we are more advanced. But no, I don't think we play with that yet. I don't know if Michael has something to add.
So yeah, kind of experimenting with GDC is definitely planned, but that would be quite considerable extra effort right now because we essentially have our own runtime, very low-level models, which would need to be additionally adjusted to work with GDC. That's extra effort. And for most applications, like we have problems right now that wouldn't be immediate gain because they are not CPU bound, and the performance degradation comes from the additional GC pressure because of like bad porting, GC location, stuff like that. So there wouldn't be like immediate gain. Because of that, we delay the moment of trying with the GDC until it becomes kind of more pragmatical.
Also, just to add something, I think at this stage it's not a good idea because we really want to compare it against D1. We don't want our code to perform better given the same backend. So we want to get at least as good as in D1 with DMD and then see if we can get anything extra. That's it then. Thank you.